Peter here from the Psycho Chicken Eco Farm. Today we're going to talk about compost. There are a lot of videos out there that say you can do this, you can't do that, you should do it this way, you should do it that way. The truth is, organic matter rots. And that's what we want. Rotted organic matter that's full of biological life, lots of diversity, from fungus to bacteria, other microbes, nematodes, all the good stuff that'll get in there and help support your plant's roots in the soil. So today, we're going to be building a compost pile out of some horse manure that I hauled in and some spent brewery grain. The spent brewery grain is great because it's really high in nitrogen. Those seeds have been malted, which activates enzymes, which converts starches to sugars, and then the brewers extract the sugars, so what's left are just the proteins, which they actually don't want in their beer, as it can cause chill haze, make the beer look cloudy when it's cold. But turns out if you add that to your compost piles, somewhere between 1 to 3 ratio of brewery grain to, in this case, horse manure, but this horse manure is mixed in with a lot of bedding, so there's a lot of what people would refer to as brown material in there. You get about the right balance for your pile to get really hot really quick. And that's important because you can help break down a lot of the weed seeds that are left in your compost from whatever matter you put in there. If you've got stuff that you've collected, grass clippings, stuff that you've mowed, any brown material that might have some seeds in it, if you get the pile hot enough, it'll kill those seeds so they won't germinate when you spread it on your beds. You also have to consider, I say you can put anything in a compost pile that rots. Personally, I don't like to put anything that nature didn't make in there. I'm fine with anything in moderation, even dead animal products. You don't want to fill your whole pile with the dead animals or fats or anything, but everything in moderation, trying to maintain a good ratio between green and brown. So what we do here is we have this highly brown horse manure, which does have some nitrogen in it and will get hot on its own. But when we add the spent brewery grain, which is in the truck back there, it sort of supercharges that pile and gets really hot pretty fast. And then if you stir it, it'll do it again. But you don't have to follow too many rules about your compost piles. You can build it once and let it sit. As long as you give it enough time, it'll be okay. You can tell because when you dig into it, it'll either be finished composting or not. When you have worms migrating up through your entire pile, you know it's pretty much done because it's cooled off enough for those guys to move in there. So for the ratio of brown to green, what we do here is about 1 to 3 or between 1 to 3 and 1 to 5, the really hot green stuff to the brown stuff. So 1 of the spent brewery grain to 3 or 1 to 5 of the horse manure being the brown stuff. And that seems to work really well here. It builds a nice hot pile. I'll usually mix them once on this tractor scale thing. We've got a small tractor with a bucket. I'll just build the pile and then move it about a month later and then let it sit for about a year, 6 months to a year, and that gives us a really nice finished compost that's fantastic when you spread it on top. We'll also look at doing it on a smaller scale at our home, where we just take our kitchen scraps and mix those with collected leaves from the neighborhood. We just keep a bag of leaves that our neighbors have kindly raked up and bagged for us. Keep that down by the compost pile, and we put in the week's kitchen scraps or the days if we've been processing a lot of vegetables and things, and then cover that with a thick layer of leaf mulch, and we don't even stir that pile. After a year, it's good to go to be spread on things. So I hope you enjoy this video, and you'll see one thing that's really important is that you do get, for this tractor mix pile, especially with the spent brewery grain in there, is that you mix it really well. If you don't, you'll get pockets that go anaerobic, which aren't great for your pile. They smell, they'll break down over time. Again, it's nothing to get freaked out and worried about, but the more you mix the pile ahead of time, the better off the decomposition will go, and you'll get more even decomposition and even heating up to try and get all of those weed seeds that might be in there. So you'll see on the time lapse after I get this out, when I bring the tractor up, that I will pick up a scoop of the spent brewery grain, dump it on top of the manure, lift that up, bring it over to the pile, drop it on the pile, and sometimes if I didn't feel like I got a good mix, I'll pick it up again and drop it again just to get everything really well mixed in there. So enjoy the video. I wanted to say one or two more things about the brown to green ratio in your compost pile. Don't get too stressed out about this. When you research that on the internet, you'll find anything from 2 parts green to 1 part brown to 1 part green to 30 parts brown. You might wonder, why is there such disparity in what you find when you research? Part of the problem is because it depends on your context. Your temperature, your humidity, the amount of rainfall you get, and your source material all contribute to how fast your compost pile is gonna finish off, or if it'll get hot. So just experiment. If it seems too wet, probably is. If it seems too dry, probably is. A good way to tell that is if you take a handful of compost and squeeze it as hard as you can, you should only get 1 or 2 drops of water out of it. If it just pours out, then it's definitely too wet, and you might want to stir it to help aerate that stuff out. If you squeeze as hard as you can, you don't get anything, or if you open your hand and it doesn't form sort of a loose ball and just sort of falls apart, it might be too dry. And then you could give it some water. Again, if you water the layers as you build it, if you're in a dry climate, that'll help it get going. If you're in a wet climate, you probably want to put a cover over it. You don't want to snug that cover down on the end, because then it can't breathe. You're creating an environment that will allow the microbes to do their work. And microbes, just like all life, has to respire. So if you seal off your compost pile with a plastic tarp and it can't breathe, it's not going to finish. Alrighty, so that's how we build these compost piles out here. You'll notice, again, I want to emphasize the amount of mixing that I put into each of those piles, moving some of the spent brewery grain on top of the horse manure, mixing it there at least once, maybe twice, and then taking it over to the pile that I want to build, dropping it high so that it has a chance to tumble down and mix again, and if it seems too clumpy or not mixed up enough, pulling it up and mixing again. This is a particular issue with the spent brewery grain and horse manure, because the spent brewery grain will stick together and it just gets anaerobic and stinky and doesn't promote the type of aerobic bacteria that you really want growing in your compost piles. Do keep in mind that source material for your compost is really important. In spite of being able to put anything in there that's made by nature, it doesn't have a barcode. I don't even like to put cardboard in my farm. Some people don't mind that, but there are some chemicals used in the production of paper that I just don't really want in my soil. The other thing to watch out for are persistent herbicides. There's a lot of persistent herbicides now that won't break down except in exposure to UV. So they will pass right through the cow or the horse. They'll be in your compost pile no matter how hot you get it. They don't break down. And when you spread it out onto your land, hopefully you're doing a no-till technique, and all of that compost will just be on top of your soil where you'll get some chance of it to break down in the sun. But it's really hard, because when you talk to people that you get horse manure from, a lot of them don't know what the farmers who are cutting their hay use to control broadleaf weeds in their hay fields. And it's almost impossible, at least here in Western North Carolina, to find organic hay. may be minimal if you know the farmer who's growing the hay, but getting that connection one generation past the horse owner back to the hay grower is a challenge. You may want to take some of the manure or your finished compost and plant some beans or tomatoes in them and let them just grow up on a windowsill in your house. You can do it in the wintertime. Check those plants, make sure they look healthy, they don't have curled or twisted or gnarled up leaves. If they look funny, take them to your local agricultural consultant and see what they have to say. Most locations have good ag extension agents that can really help you out. So you can also bring in a lot of weeds that you don't want, especially with horse manure, because it's not digested nearly as much as with cows. Ones that I've had trouble with here are Johnson grass, which is really difficult to get rid of once it spreads. It's kind of like Bermuda grass in the soil. It sends out runners, has a lot of seeds, very strong, healthy, vigorous plant. So wherever I build a compost pile, I let my pile sit for at least a year, and that gives me time to come back and get any seeds that may not have been deep enough in the pile to get cooked up so they won't germinate. And I'll pull out those Johnson grasses before they can set seed. If I miss it and they've already set seed, hopefully they haven't dropped yet, I'll collect that and I'll actually incinerate the seeds in my biochar pile or biochar pit when I'm making biochar. The other thing we have trouble with from horse manure is thorny amaranth or thorny pigweed. It's not that difficult to control if you stay on it, but if you let one of those guys go to seed, they drop a lot of seeds and it's troublesome. So keep that in mind. Again, I don't want you guys to feel like you can't make compost without a tractor. Tractors are a real mixed blessing. If you're on land like we have that's significantly degraded and needs a ton of rehabilitation, the tractor can speed it up a lot, but it's a huge expense and it is really not necessary. You can grow an incredible amount of food with feet on the ground farming, and building compost piles, make sure you don't have to go to the gym. You'll be strong. So let's get a little bit closer and take a look at these piles and see if I got my moisture content good on this one, and I've got a finished pile over here we'll look at and see what the moisture content looks like there. I'm going to stick this thermometer in the pile that was built, I think this section of the pile was built about 2 weeks ago, so we'll see what temperature it's up to. And while that thermometer's coming to temperature, let's see what we got as far as our moisture content here. I said you want to try and get one drop of water out of a good tight fist squeeze and for it to stick together. So hopefully you can see we're getting a couple drips out of here. We're in the compost pile. It's sticking together pretty well in spite of having a really high amount of organic matter in there. Tons of sawdust, a little bit of grass and straw. So this is just about the perfect moisture concentration for a newly built pile if you don't get too much rain in the next month. But if you can feel that moisture on your hand and start to see some water coming between your fingers when you put it together, oh there, yellow jacket, you will be okay, and this pile will heat up really well. Let's see what our temperature is back here. So this back part of the pile is up to 125 degrees Fahrenheit or so. We are not going to get that much temperature out of it here since we just built this pile, but the horse manure, as you saw when I was mixing it with the tractor, was steaming a little bit, so it does have, it's already started composting a little bit. Yeah, this one's just hovering around 110. This pile will get up to close to 150 or so, maybe even 160 within the next 48 hours, and that'll really get all of the seeds that would want to germinate in the center of the pile taken care of. It'll sterilize them so that they can't germinate. The outside layer won't get as hot, and we'll need to stir that pile in really well to get that going. Let's go over to our finished pile that we've been spreading on our beds over here and see what it looks like. This is a pile we built last year, and we've been using it to amend our rows here throughout the season. You can tell we've got some plants coming up in here. It's important to keep anything growing on here that might set seed off of it. The thermometer's showing like 98 degrees, so it's still doing a little bit of cooking in there. There were some worms already in here. It's a nice Nice consistency, really easy to plant right into that. Very fluffy. And it holds a ball, but I don't think I'm going to be able to get any moisture out of this. So this is right where you want your compost to be a year out. I've got some bigger pieces of wood in here. I actually used to build these piles with wood chips in them, and that resulted in a little bit more woody piles than I wanted. Still fine, didn't have any problem top dressing with it and planting straight into it, but I like a finer compost like this.